Yeah, but if we think about even just the engineering challenge, so looking into the terrain itself, you've got like a couple of mountain ranges it has to pass through.
Yeah.
One of those mountain ranges is actually located on the San Andreas Fault. So,
Yep.
and I think that contains a 20-mile long tunnel. So putting a tunnel under a mountain, which is super active in terms of earthquakes.
Yep.
So,
welcome back to the Offsite podcast for 2025. I'm Jason Lancini. I'm joined by Carlos Cavallo. Carlos, welcome back, mate.
Thank you very much, and welcome to Europe.
Oh yeah, guten Tag. For those that don't know.
Yeah. Jason has moved to Germany, so he's now well and truly living in Europe. So less of a time burden for yourself trying to run a podcast.
Yeah, it's way better doing a podcast not at 9 p.m. at night.
Absolutely.
Well, we're thinking like, what topic do we cover this week? Because there's been no news in construction or infrastructure at all over the last few weeks. So it's hard to find.
Yeah, really struggling.
A year's worth of news in 3 weeks.
I mean, some of the biggest news was actually yesterday, so I didn't have to go back very far to find something interesting. But
is this going to be a UK government announcement news?
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Your definition of biggest news and mine are slightly different, but this is interesting. So,
biggest construction-related news. Yesterday, the new UK Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, had a bit of a speech around boosting the economy, and a huge part of that speech is around major infrastructure schemes that the UK government are going to back to try and boost jobs, spend, and everything else that comes with it. I mean, there's 3 major notable sort of schemes. The third one at Heathrow, massive scheme. Albeit, I read a follow-on article that suggested construction could start in 2035. So looking forward to that in the 40s or whenever that's out. Lower Thames Crossing. So I know the teams on that project have been waiting for sort of DCO, which is ultimately the final go-ahead to build this scheme. That's been and gone a couple of times through delays, but she's backed it now. So I think there's a date in May that they're all looking forward to getting the green light, which sounds like we will get. So that's really good. And then probably the most important is the redevelopment of Old Trafford, which is an area of Manchester, and it's the home of Manchester United.
Mm-hmm.
She gave the go-ahead for the full regen of that area. So it'll be flats, shops, schools, the lot, to rebuild everything centered around the home of football. So
it's like it's like straight out of like the Roman Emperor playbook, right? We can't give you a train line in HS2, so what do? You build a stadium to keep the people keep the people happy.
The people want sports. Yeah. Strong.
What was left off the list?
The second half of High Speed 2. I don't think that had a mention. But yeah, obviously she wasn't just sort of listing project names. Just wanted to name a few. So I would expect over the next few weeks we start to see more and more popping out because they do see it as this front and center strategy to boost the economy. So yeah.
Well, speaking of half-finished railways, that's a perfect segue to topics for this week. So we're going to start off in California, where the California High-Speed Rail Scheme is another of the half-finished rails around the world, and dive into some recent research pulled together by the team here at AFEX, which I found super interesting. Then I guess we have to talk about, it doesn't seem like anyone's bringing it up, but there was a big announcement about AI infrastructure spending in the US so it doesn't seem to have been discussed enough. So the $500 billion Stargate project and the implications for that potentially in construction and infrastructure. And then finally, we're going to circle back to some news from late last year around some acquisitions or sales of construction businesses. So Lendlease's UK division, and then Strabag purchasing an Australian contractor, Georgiou. So we dive in. For anyone that has followed or is aware of this project, they're aware that in any conversation about inefficient, usually government-funded infrastructure, the poster child for that around the world seems to just get the unlucky title of the California High-Speed Rail project. Its goal was to connect two major centers in California, and it was supposed to be done for something around $30 billion when it was touted around 2010. Fast forwarding to today, it remains underway partially, funded partially, with an estimate of over $100 billion needed to fully pay for it. And it is the most expensive project currently in existence, I think, if we exclude NEOM. And I think it is the most expensive railway per mile of rail ever. Not the title you really want to go for. So yeah, where do you want to start, Carlos? There's so much to dive into. I think the research, I think anyone that's listening to definitely go and look at the recent newsletter published on the offsite. It really dives into some super interesting angles of this project.
Yeah, it's massive. I've done the drive between those two cities, and like it is quite a distance. It looks like a lot smaller on a map than it is in reality. But no, I started to sort of dig into. Obviously, it's a huge cost overrun. I think the initial estimate was 33 billion, and now they're up to something around 120.
Yep.
And to ask you a question on how expensive it is, it's something like $200 million per mile, something crazy. So it's a huge expense. But I was trying to dig into, I guess, the similarities with other schemes and cost overruns to sort of look at, maybe try and dig into a little bit around the why. Outside of pure sort of political issues. We saw a similar sort of increase on HS2 before the second section was cancelled. So it went from sort of 35 billion to about 100 billion. And obviously the UK made the decision to sort of can that. But most of the delays are around like issues of land acquisitions, local opposition. There was the environmental impact of sort of habitats and historical sites. So there was this sort of critical mass of issues that led to, we're not going to spend the money on this scheme. But the overrun was kind of the same thing. And I think they kind of got through that phase of the project to try and get it done rather than sort of can anything. The challenges looks the same. Sorry, go ahead.
The common pattern is, right, start at 30 billion, balloon to 100 billion, cut half the railway scope, and then just try and like finish that for something around double the original cost.
Yeah.
Or something like that. But interestingly, like, you know, HS2, the scope reduced so that we were sort of still connecting to major cities that were in the goal at the moment. So this rail line, for those that don't know, was supposed to connect San Fran to LA. And currently the scope has been reduced to what's called the initial operating section, which unfortunately, because the two, end locations are at either end, you end up with the bit that they're actually building as just a segment in the middle. So sort of the railway to nowhere.
Yeah. But if we think about even just the engineering challenge, so looking into the terrain itself, you've got like a couple of mountain ranges it has to pass through.
Yep.
One of those mountain ranges is actually located on the San Andreas Fault. So,
yep.
And I think that contains a 20-mile long tunnel. So putting a tunnel under a mountain, which is super active in terms of earthquakes.
Yep.
So you compare the sort of terrain challenges between like that and HS2, it's like night and day. We had to like cross a river to not disturb some ducks and a few sort of badgers along the way. They've got earthquakes, mountains, and everything else that comes with it. So you can see why it's a seriously complicated scheme.
Yeah, no, the complexity, I think the pattern, you've described some similarities with some other mega projects. I think there's some other, that pattern continues. So in the article that was published, they were talking that there were over 1,500 change orders or variations or compensation events that have been, and bear in mind, these are the ones that have been the government has like paid or signed off. So these are the ones that are effectively agreed. Not in the background, there's some multiple of these probably that are being back and forth argued. So over 1,500, and some of them are the biggest single, some of them are hundreds of millions of dollars. So there's one change order for one section was 200 million, another one 240 million. So there's a lot of change happening post award of contracts, and it goes back to the old story of the building before design is finished. And when you dive into it, there's just so many similarities to how other projects have gone down this path where design's constructed and the route's still changing, or the technical design is still being completed while being built. Yeah, I guess it's just another of the cautionary tales for
and a lot of that
method of
pre-construction. Well, I guess it's not pre-construction, but that trying to get to a point where you can just build the line. It looks like they've got serious issues with acquiring land. So I saw a stat from just a few years ago where they'd only sort of bought about 20% of the land they need off of farmers and like retail and commercial.
Presumably that's also made worse by the fact that the route changes, so it's hard to acquire land.
Yeah.
You gotta think about the land that they did acquire or whatever that is no longer 100%. Needed.
And then also apparently there's a huge issue with utility records. So you can imagine leaving cities, the records get slimmer and slimmer in terms of like as-built. So they've got massive delays because they're trying to divert utilities and they're probably almost digging and scanning to see what's even there because there's no strong records in terms of what was built. So it's kind of the classic problems that we see on projects, but blown up onto this crazy scale. But
you've got the design and construct, a lot of these technical challenges. Then you've got the good old fashioned politics of it all. One of the best parts, I'll even read directly from it. So there was a New York Times article pointing to political interference around the route selection of the project. And so there was originally proposed this semi-direct route from LA to San Fran along the existing kind of interstate or highway corridor. And then in the Times article, it wrote, the train's path out of Los Angeles was diverted across a second mountain range to the rapidly growing suburbs of the Mojave Desert, a route whose most salient advantage appears to be that it ran through the district of a powerful LA county supervisor. Nice. Originally, the French National Railway, SNCF, was working on the project, and due to political dysfunctionality, that's not the right word, they decided to depart the project in 2011 and go build a railway in Morocco instead, which they finished in 2018. Fun fact.
Nice. Yeah, I guess they are horsing on, and I can see why they're horsing on. I don't know if you've ever driven in and out of LA. The traffic is unbelievable, and these motorways are like 8 lanes wide in both directions. So they need to get people off the roads. They don't want people trying to fly these super short routes. So at the moment, like, it does make sense that the train's most viable option to shift people in and out of cities, but serious expense.
And I guess they're horsing on because you get into a sunk cost problem.
Yeah. It'd be quite embarrassing to like a half-built railway across the richest
classic how big things get done.
Yeah, for sure.
And so the active sections, that initial operating portion, there are a couple of big packages, I think 5 or so big packages. One of them just finished. I think it was section 4, and there's a bunch of them that are currently scheduled to finish in 2026. So a year to a year and a half or 2 years remaining on that initial operating portion by the looks of it, which probably leads to, and now the change in US government is looking at all sorts of cost reduction and expenditure review. And this probably is like right in the crosshairs. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Segue to topic number 2, which is this massive Manhattan Project style thing called Stargate. As announced, $500 billion initiative led by OpenAI, backed by a bunch of tech giants like SoftBank, Oracle, NVIDIA, and Microsoft, with the goal of setting up a number of advanced data centers across the US and to advance the capabilities around the development of artificial intelligence. For those of us in construction and infrastructure, I'd say most people probably have heard this news to some degree. It's been on every news channel across the world for the last sort of week. It was announced basically on, I think, day 2 or something of the new presidency.
of the circus.
And there is some question marks as to how much of it was already is happening, was happening, has happened, and how real the announcement is. I guess we can get into that. But it'd be interesting to understand and think about what this means for people in our industry of construction and infrastructure. I think they're forecasting to target something like 20 massive data centers with this investment, with 100 billion supposed to happen this year. Yeah, what are your thoughts on the project and what impact it might have to, I guess, us in construction?
Yeah, so no, the numbers are crazy. The 100 billion immediately isn't that massive considering how big the data center market is. But the 500 billion, they said, well, they'll spend over just 4 years. So that's an unbelievable amount of money to sort of announce and try to deploy immediately. I guess there'll be a difficult spot for construction because it's like a rapidly growing market. So are there already resource constraints on the individuals or the labor force with the skills and ability to actually build these data centers? If it's already rapidly growing, you would expect there's no excess of people that have been there, done it, and have the experience. So will they be able to resource this to be able to do something like that in 4 years, all in one country? Must be an issue. And then the other side is, does the 500 billion, because I couldn't get to the bottom of this, I don't think so, it include the building of nuclear power stations or something to fund these data centers with electricity, or to feed, I should say?
The analysis that I've seen says yes, that's included. Let's use the word juiced up the numbers to try and get to the 500 billion. And I think they've included the energy, the cost to drive over there to look at the energy, the cost to go and, I think they've included every possible cost that they can think of related or semi-related to the project in order to juice it. The reporting, so it kind of indicates that there was an initial commitment of 100. There was a challenge from Donald Trump to try and get the announcement to 200. And then the consortium, including SoftBank founder, kind of targeted this 500 number. I think there's everything plus the kitchen sink in this number.
Yeah, because there was an interesting part of there's a podcast called the All In podcast that Jason I listened to. And they were discussing the sort of concept of off-the-grid power. And what we're ultimately trying to do is pump up the rate that non-corporations are paying for power. So if suddenly they take all the power off the grid and the rate spikes, the public are paying effectively this hiked rate, which is going towards things like data centers, which would be not good. So if they go for this off the grid, like power generations, aka just generate their own power, the 4-year timeline becomes a bit crazy, because for that much power, and we know how much power they actually need, these data centers, and they're trying to build 20 in 4 years. I don't think they could build the energy infrastructure in 4 years. Imagine you asked anyone to build even a relatively small wind farm or solar farm in 4 years. That already sounds punchy considering this is day one. So I wonder how they'll actually manage that. For me, the timeline is insane, and I don't know how you can start to think about that being achievable.
It goes to the question a little bit of how much of it was already underway. So there was already the first data center of this project is located in Abilene, Texas. The project is already under construction, and that foundational planning work had started like in 2022. I think there was reporting that this kind of project and big idea was pitched to the Biden administration before, and they kind of didn't bite. The time frame, I think there's a lot of pre-planning going into this, and the announcement just happens at some point along the way when it's kind of like politically expedient. And we've seen over the last 6 months how many announcements and how much effort is going into nuclear and trying to get nuclear co-located with the locations of these data centers. I think ultimately from a construction perspective, we're in an industry in construction that has, through the history of time, been boom and bust. And like feast and famine, there becomes a big wave of building some form of infrastructure or whatever, and everyone goes in and tries to build the work, and the cost of building it goes up. And then at some point that kind of stops, and all of the overhead costs and the expansion of people's wages and the the equipment that they've bought all now has to find a home, and you end up with these like pretty lean and scarce times in the industry. Often coupled with that is the like, I guess you call it the like profitless boom. So the people trying to build stuff see the price of stuff go up to build it, and then they think the contractors are making a ton of money, but really all the cost inputs for the contractor are going up in the same scale. The wages that people they need to pay in order to keep talent, the cost of all the raw materials. So yeah, it becomes like, is this just another one of the many, I guess, profitless boom cycles that happens? And then are we left in the future, or it could even be sooner? We saw this announcement just a couple of days ago, or it actually happened pre-Christmas, but it's been in the news a lot around this DeepSeek model from a Chinese company, which looks like it can allegedly, although there's a lot of people questioning the validity of this report, train a model for a fraction of the cost of what ones in the US tech giants are being trained for, and then putting into question the need for all this infrastructure. And it's, at some point, at any point along this pipeline, on this journey of we're spending all this money on infrastructure, and all these contractors are going in trying to deliver all this work and find all these people and pay them more money. And at some point, does the music stop for any reason? And left there are construction contractors with inflated salaries, projects to finish, competing on raw materials. So yeah, I guess it's a big old run up to, are we basically just going to go into another one of these like profitless boom bust cycles?
Yeah. I mean, hopefully like a benefit of the sort of boom cycle is they should be rapidly skilling a workforce. So I guess that's one of the benefits from this, is they're going to generate those skills over the course of however many years, because they're going to have to recruit so many people into the street. So like that's a bit of a benefit. Yeah, like with the news out of China, the cost, new technologies and the infrastructure behind it rapidly sort of decreases over time. So this project in 10 years will look like probably the worst value for money project at the time, because things get cheaper. But then can you afford to not do it now and sit and wait for the things to become cheaper? Because the only reason they become cheaper is we get better at doing it, and it becomes repeatable, and we develop technologies off the back. So they're probably stuck in a bit of limbo of, are we going to compete with China? And if we do, we need to do what we think is the right way forward to build the infrastructure, to generate the power, to secure, I guess, your hold on the AI market.
Yeah, but it's like a derivative service industry, construction. It's responding to other markets that are wanting to build some form of infrastructure. We need to build a bunch of wind power. Therefore, okay, all the contractors go and try and become professional at building wind generation. It just seems as though there's a big opportunity and big amount of work. There is probably the risks of, wage explosion, not enough labor, not enough materials. And so the contractors could be in that kind of profitless boom scenario. But on top of this whole thing is, we need the energy, we need the infrastructure, because we need to build these AI models in this way, and we need these data centers because eventually these AI models will have applications that will pay for all of this capital expenditure. And at any point, if people get nervous that statement isn't true, you see they just push pause a little bit on the further development, or they cancel a couple, and all of that ripples through the whole industry. Eventually you end up with contractors signing contracts that are to deliver this infrastructure, or gearing up their business around a pipeline that's coming. There's a bunch of like, we're doing this because of this, because of this, because of this, and at every step there's an assumption, and it just takes someone to go, well, actually, if the Chinese can build a model for this, do we need to spend this much money? Are we going to be able to charge what we're expecting to charge for this product to pay for this infrastructure? Any one of those question marks causes someone who's footing this $500 million alleged bill to go, I might just wait, or I might do 100 and then I'll wait and see.
It's tough because there's no like definite outcome. It's not like you build a bridge, you get a bridge. They're all betting on the service that's going to come out of the back ends. But if you're the building contractor, surely it makes more sense to place your bets on, I'm going to focus on the energy production for this big data center project, because that's transferable to every other industry. Energy is not going to disappear, rather than going through potentially the niche side of the technology that currently exists within data centers.
It all becomes a supply and demand. And I think the argument you're making is that energy probably has some sort of greater latent demand, that if it all kind of goes paused or pushed out, that there's still like this energy demand, which is probably true. There's also, because you've also got this kind of energy transition thing happening in the background. So it's probably true. But, there's a big talk about nuclear and how a lot of this is going to be powered by nuclear. And if you kind of gear yourself up to be the nuclear specialist and you get one like nuclear issue, there's like there's a lot of things that can cause the market that you've like kind of geared up to go after.
There's a lot of bets going on across the board, really.
Big bets, big bickies. End of song.
Big bet, big bicky. Is that the name of the episode? No, definitely want to keep tabs on. I think just seeing some of the, what do they expect to be able to do from these data centers is quite interesting, like curing cancer, creating vaccines, like complicated things.
But isn't that all just it's fairy dust? It's at some point it'll do something that'll pay for all this stuff.
At the moment, it writes good emails, so we'll take that.
Yeah, it doesn't even do that. It doesn't write that good an email. It gives you an email that you can rewrite 3 times. I think next week we should dive into some of the potential applications that are actually useful for people and maybe dive into that. Yeah, cool. I think it's very interesting. I think the ultimate coda to this conversation is what is going on in Europe?
That's a broad question.
Are they going to build any data centers? Or, does it, you get to the I guess in the AI marketplace, there's, OpenAI is spending $100 billion to train a model, therefore Anthropic or Amazon need to, therefore Google need to. So it's kind of like you have to spend the money to compete. So does this then, with the US saying, we're going to do this, go to Europe, and does Europe go, my God, we have to pull our finger out to compete? Or, do they just go, we don't have any money, so...
Yeah, but is it their money? It's still the big tech giants predominantly, so...
Yeah, I guess the interesting thing, actually, if you look at the consortium that are behind this the Stargate project, there's obviously SoftBank in there, which is a Japanese company, but a lot of the funding that goes into the SoftBank funds is Middle East money. Yeah, and then specifically there's sovereign wealth, and then specifically in the consortium is another company called MGX. MGX is effectively a sovereign wealth fund company that invests in AI and infrastructure as well. So even this $500 billion in the US, a whole chunk of it, and even the money that OpenAI is kicking in, OpenAI has raised a ton of money from Gulf states as well. So it's a not insignificant portion of this alleged 500 million that is, and the 500 million isn't going to, not to get too technical, it's not likely to come from all equity. So they're not all putting in $500 million to fund this. It's likely they put in, 100 and lever up 5 times with debt. And then a lot of that debt also comes from Gulf states as well.
I tell you what, I'd be sweaty sitting in that board meeting when the project starts to go wrong.
You should try and see me trying to buy a new iPhone. It's like $2,000 or something. And then imagine sitting in this room.
500 billion. Well, shit, we need another 200 billion.
Big bets, big bickies.
Yeah.
I think, watch this space for sure. Topic 3, reflecting on some things that we talked about late last year around consolidation of contractors, the need for, these kind of, let's call them, for want of a better word, the kind of tier 2 contractors in different markets, in order for them to compete on this increasing trend of mega projects, to have, kind of like a big bankrolled big brother wrap its arms around it and kind of acquire it to fund the bidding to meet the financial requirements to bid for these bigger projects. We talked about that. We even predicted that it would be a continued trend after, in the UK, I think Dornan and FM Conway were purchased. Well, in continuing in that fashion, prior to Christmas, an Australian contractor, Georgiou, which I think is firmly in this kind of tier 2 space, they do some quite large projects in the hundreds of millions, but definitely not in the mega project space. Often in joint venture, they will. That was purchased by the construction conglomerate Strabag. which I think is Austrian, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yep.
And then in almost going in the opposite direction, kind of like ships passing in the night, Lendlease, in its continued reduction of size and returning capital to investors mode, has successfully now sold its UK division to a bunch of investors. And I think they're bringing back
The name.
yeah, what's the name?
Bovis.
Mental blank. Bovis. God.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think it's almost like they're going in different directions. So Lendlease, for those that don't remember, sold their US division kind of mid to late last year, and then announced that their UK one was kind of on the market, and have successfully now exited or are exiting that business as well. Yeah, thoughts on either direction, the kind of the contraction at Lendlease or the international contractor buying local tier 2?
Yeah, so I think the Strabag case, it makes a lot of sense. So Strabag aren't in Australia. They're grabbing a company that is operating in Australia. So it's good to have a foot in that market. And as you mentioned there, they do relatively small projects. Strabag does the biggest projects in Europe. They're civil engineer specialists. They do huge tunneling schemes. That's their bread and butter. So they're entering into a new market with a pool of existing projects and can now presumably bid for the big heavy stuff. So it seems like a sensible acquisition. So yeah, makes a lot of sense. And Strabag, just for anyone listening, they are massive. They've got like 90,000 staff and they do 20 billion turnover as a group. So they are not small. And they win significant projects across Europe, a huge company. So it makes a lot of sense. The second is quite interesting. So they've been acquired by a company called Atlas Holdings, which is basically a private equity firm. Yeah, so they bought the UK arm of Lendlease. Their strategy around bringing back the name Bovis is to try and basically leverage the reputation of that company before it was bought, so that it feels like a familiar brand, something that people recognize. So yeah, interesting. I can't think of another example similar, but yeah.
The story of Georgiou is super interesting. So for people that don't know of the company, it was founded in like late 70s by Spiro Georgiou in Western Australia, and has progressively grown. It made an acquisition, I think, in mid 90s, and the founder led the company until like 1998, and then his son took over as CEO. So it's definitely like a family company that has been built over a long period of time. Interestingly, the founder Spiro passed away at late 23, and I don't know. I wonder if that was the kind of catalyst for then exploring whether from the family business perspective, getting equity to, the family or whether that was related. And as you said, Strabag isn't in the market and is one of the big European construction powerhouses, and I guess continues the European tradition of exporting construction as a major service.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I didn't actually see whether they're maintaining the brand name. Or anything will be changing from an operational point of view immediately. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see, are they going to start winning larger and larger contracts over the next few years? So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
I was just also doing some quick searching because I thought I had read this recently, but out of just total coincidence and really, it's actually worth acknowledging super unfortunate circumstances. I mentioned that Spiro had passed a year or so ago, the founder or the CEO or former CEO from Georgiou. And then in super unfortunate circumstances, the CEO of Strabag actually passed, I think last month in January, like a super young age of 44. Yeah, worth acknowledging it. Super unfortunate. And I guess thoughts go out to the Strabag team and the family there. Cool. Any other thoughts on the topic, mate?
No, I think it'll be a good trend to keep track of this year. Are we going to keep seeing this consolidation of smaller firms into the big sort of giants like Strabag, Vinci? I've just forgotten the name of the Spanish one.
ACS.
ACS. So yeah, it'd be good to keep tabs on that because it seems to be a bit of a trend. We've seen at least 3 or 4 over the last 12 months alone. So
in all regions, right? In all regions, definitely there's continue this expansion of like all of these big European construction contractors continuing to expand into APAC, into North America. It's interesting as to why that's like a trend. Like the Swiss have watchmaking or whatever. What's the origin of that? But yeah, it's amazing the network of companies that are ultimately owned by one of the top 5 European contractors. And the amount of exported.
Could be as simple as, how do these massive companies increase turnover? Quick to buy.
Well, yeah, I can see the motivation from their side because, especially you've got a Europe that's like not super healthy, and it's great diversification for them into markets where there's work. One market is announcing 500 billion in infrastructure spending, and the other one, can't pay for a whatever. But it's like, how are they so competitive, and why how are they able to be so competitive in those markets? Because it's not like they go there and fail. They go there and are very successful.
Yeah.
Maybe that's another podcast. Carlos, do you want to read us out?
Absolutely. No, thank you very much, everyone, for tuning into today's show, the first of a new season. If you enjoyed today's episode, please do think about liking the video and following us on your chosen podcast platform. We appreciate your support, and we'll catch you all next week.
Bye-bye.